Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and before we get started, just as I sat down to film, the people in my house just started making a lot of noise. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. If you can, I'm sorry. I'm sure it'll be gone soon. Anyway, today I have a review for you that I've been, neglecting, let's put it like that, since January. Although I'm not sure if I'm gonna call it a review. It's gonna be something in between a review or a rant, or not or. It's gonna be something in between a review and a rant probably, and that is of Dark Glass Mountain. No, not, that's the wrong one. The Serpent Bride, which is the first book in the Dark Glass Mountain series by Sarah Douglas. This book is the book that has been on my TBR for the longest time. I already owned it when I still lived at my parents'. I then kept it at my parents' house, or my mom's house, for a really long time. For some reason it wasn't part of the big unhaul of the books that I still had at her place that I did a few years back. And then I decided, you know what? I'm gonna read it, because we love reading adult fantasy written by women, especially when it goes more in the direction of classic fantasy or early modern fantasy, so 90s and early 2000s. And I believe this one is from the early 2000s. Yeah, it was published in 2007. So this review will be a little bit different than my usual reviews, because, not gonna lie, I kind of want to rant about it a little bit. So I will have a spoilery section at the end of this video. However, I personally think this is not necessarily a book that I would recommend. So if you don't intend on ever reading the book anyway, you maybe wouldn't have clicked on this video, but you know, if you don't intend on reading the book anyway, then yeah, just stay for the spoiler part. I know I personally enjoy watching rant reviews of books that I don't intend on reading. But yeah, anyway, I will still try and do a spoiler-free review at the beginning, but first, what is this book about? Basically, it's a very, very classic epic high fantasy story. There's this evil that's on the rise that was captured and imprisoned probably thousands of years ago, and now everything is coming together to make sure basically that this evil is breaking free and stuff is happening. And in the center of it all, you have multiple main characters who will be the ones to fight that evil. It's a very, very classic chosen one fantasy story. In this first book there wasn't a lot of subversion so far, and I don't want to necessarily say how this book is marketed in the back. Whoops, it just fell down. Because not gonna lie, I mean, I will get to it later, but not gonna lie, that was one of the reasons why I ended up being disappointed. But yeah, so very classic high fantasy story, not a lot of subversion in the first book. That's basically where we start. I gave this book 2.5 stars. I still kind of want to continue on with the series, and I still, even though I gave it such a low rating, kind of loved it. It's complicated, okay? This book, in a way, hit all of the spots that I want from classic fantasy. I love just... not always. It can be really boring, but if it's done right, I love just very campy, classic high fantasy. You know, no subversion of tropes, whatever. And that is what this book gave me. However, the reason why I ended up giving it 2.5 stars is because I think that the female characters in this book are treated like absolute trash, even though it's written by a female author. And there's actually a lot of like stuff that I'm not a fan, that almost toes the line, maybe even crosses the line to being harmful in its depiction of female characters and how they're written. And that is what I will mostly go into in the spoilery section, where I won't necessarily go into specific spoilers, but I very much generally want to talk about how the women are treated in the story and why I thought it's kind of not the best. Also, like, and I think that's why ultimately, even though I enjoyed my time with the book, even though I didn't like the book, and even though I ended up being disappointed, like, there was a very big difference between what was promised in the back of the story and what the story actually ended up being about. Because the thing that was promised at the beginning of the story is you have this main character called Ishbel. And Ishbel was basically rescued from like a scene of absolute horror in her childhood by this secret cult and priesthood, and she becomes the archpriestess of this cult. This happens in the prologue and the first chapter. And this cult is called the Cult of the Serpent, or like the Order of the Serpent. The Order of the Coil is what it's called, and they worship this serpent god. And what they do and why they're not exactly well liked and why they're looked at with a lot of mistrust in the rest of the countries and the continent is that they see visions of the future by disemboweling human sacrifices, basically. And so our main character is the archpriestess of this cult, and she's set up as this very self-assured woman who's kind of badass, and, you know, like, they don't disembowel innocent people, they mostly disembowel like criminals and rapists, and then the odd volunteer. So, you know, it's not an evil cult, even though everyone else thinks that they're an evil cult, because, you know, that's what you think when you hear they disembowel people to see visions of the future. And at the very beginning of the story, Ishbel is set up as this character who now has to leave her role as the archpriestess and has to go marry this human king man, because the marriage of the two of them will probably, possibly keep this evil from rising, or if this evil rises again, then it'll, you know, it'll be better if the two of them are married. And it, like, with how Ishbel is set up as a character, I thought it was very interesting. However, as soon as Ishbel goes to marry this human king, she very much becomes the damsel in distress and loses all agency in the story, even though she is set up as the main character at the back of the story. And that's where I was then a little bit disappointed, because I just wanted Ishbel to be the character that she could have been in all her dark glory, and she really wasn't. So that's where my disappointment came in. My dislike came in from just how the female characters were treated, but I'll get to that. Also with how Ishbel was treated, and then, you know, my enjoyment was from this being just an absolutely campy, fun ride. So far for the non-spoilery part, let me now get into the spoilery part. And I pretty much want to talk about two characters, one of them being Ishbel and the other one I forgot the name of. There's something very interesting happening in this book, in that almost all female characters are kind of unlikable, but they're also kind of treated horribly. Like this king that Ishbel has to go to marry, whose name is Maximilian, has a lover who's just set up as this very catty, jealous woman who dies a horrible death. Spoilers again. Then you have another character who's this queen, And she is also set up as a very, very vindictive woman, very much not likable, although I did end up liking her by the end of the book. But the way she is set on her journey is that she is basically betrayed by a man that she then later on ends up in a relationship with, or well, indirectly. He's not, like, he's indirectly at fault for what happens to her. And she has to then go through multiple days of just torture and rape, has to see her son being raped in front of her and killed for no reason, really. Which, you know, I'm used to female characters being treated like that by men. Seeing a female character being treated like that by a woman is somehow even worse. And it just proves that just because you belong to a marginalized group, because especially at this time, female authors in fantasy very much, I do still consider a marginalized group, even if they're white. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't also write just kind of really bad and terrible shit that's borderline harmful, if not definitely harmful. So yeah, I just really didn't like that. And then with Ishbel, there's this whole thing with agency and also with very, very dubious consent. So she goes to meet Maximilian, and Ishbel at the beginning of the story is very much set up as a kind of asexual person. She has never thought of herself as being a sexual being. She has never desired a man, she has never desired a woman, she has never desired anyone. And so Ishbel goes and meets Maximilian, and the first few times that well, first of all, the way Maximilian meets her is he has this power where he can cloak himself in shadows, and he spies on her in her room, also while taking a bath, which is already like, don't like that. I'm not a fan. Like, I know that you needed to kind of find out who your future wife is going to be because this is pretty much an arranged marriage, but you know, maybe not while she's bathing. I mean, it is set up of a reason, because she is not, like, Maximilian isn't told that she's the archpriestess or even a priestess of the coil, but he's just told that she was a ward, and so it's kind of set up like all priestesses of the coil have a tattoo of the snake somewhere on their body, so obviously he has to see her naked before he can decide if he wants to marry her or not, because he needs to know if she's a priestess of the coil. But she doesn't have the tattoo, so he believes she truly is just a ward and that the story is right, basically. So that's already... Then the first few times that the two of them have sex, the way it's written is that, like, Ishbel feels, even though it's not explicitly said, just very much feels like she's just very much dissociating during the sex, which felt like borderline like non-consensual, even though the two of them are set up to somewhat be romantic, or like you're supposed to feel like the two of them should be in a romance with each other, and Ishbel does end up falling in love with him or caring about him, but he very much falls first and falls harder. It's that type of deal. And then Ishbel falls pregnant. And first of all, like, it's a very weird use of the pregnancy trope, because Ishbel is not supposed to be able to fall pregnant, because I do believe that she technically had a hysterectomy, because as an archpriestess of a coil, you automatically have that, but, you know, magic and stuff. So she falls pregnant anyway, and then she is kidnapped. And the next about third of the book, she spends just being a damsel and being drugged by this band of evil men until she is saved. And then there's an interesting thing, because she kind of has like first platonic, or starts platonic relationships with two men, and the chemistry between her and those two men are way better than between her and Maximilian. Maximilian, when he found out that she was a priestess of the coil, just like was this disgusted by her. Those two other men appreciate her, love her, aren't like disgusted by the fact that she is a priestess of the coil, accept her as she is, and like the way the dynamics between her and those two men is written is really, really good. And I wanted her, like, if she had to end up with someone, I wanted her to end up with one of those two. She still has very little agency because she's basically just fucking around in this other kingdom and talking to the man and whatever, but it's neither here nor there. And then her baby is born, and the second her baby is born, her baby is sacrificed by an evil guy to the evil thing that everyone is scared of rising, and that's what makes this evil rise. And so she is back to just having not had any agency at all, and the only reason she existed in the story is to have this baby, so this baby could then bring this evil into the world, or the death of the baby. Which... I hated that. Although I do love the relationship between her and the woman that I talked about earlier, who also went through multiple days of rape, because this other woman actually also is really appreciative of her and is like, well, tell me, how did you disembowel all those men? So I do really like the relationship between those two. But yeah, there's just a lot coming together overall. And then also, you know, Ishbel and Maximilian don't end up together again because Maximilian by now doesn't trust Ishbel anymore and slept with another woman who's also head over heels and who's really catty towards Ishbel, and that woman also falls pregnant. And it's like all the female characters serve either as like receptacles of trauma, incubators for whatever reason to bring drama into the whole story, or they have no agency at all. And I think that's what ultimately just like made me say that this book is just really not a good book. Do I intend to continue on with the story? Yes, I still do intend to continue on because, as I said, I still had fun with the story. I just don't think it's a good story. But yeah, that's it basically, because I've rambled on enough already, and I don't think most people will be that interested in this book anyway, because I've not seen a lot of people talk about it ever, and it's also quite old. But yeah, tell me in the comments down below, did you make it until the end of the video? What did you think about the things that I just commented on? If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about it, give me a thumbs up, and also maybe subscribe. All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!